it's like every exit you take as a creator, that leads to a highway, which then leads to another exit, which leads to another highway, and there's never really an end in sight. You're just along for the ride and hoping that the surroundings are conducive for someone like you.
Welcome to Driven to Create, the podcast that explores the journeys of those who can't help but bring their ideas to life. Today's episode is The Creator's Journey. I tried to be cute by coming up with a funny title, but it's a play on the hero's journey and how it applies to creators. Since we don't always have one straight road, everything's a little windy, we take detours often, but if you keep going, you kind of find your way back to center and until you hit the next set of detours.
Yeah.
Today I'm joined by the talented Matt Guastamacchio, who is an artist, music producer, and filmmaker living in Nashville, Tennessee. I've had the privilege of calling him a friend, a peer, and a colleague for the past 10 to 12 years. Matt, if you could just introduce yourself and probably say it better than I would, be awesome.
Okay, yeah. I'm like you said, I'm a music producer, filmmaker, and an artist. I've been doing all three of those things for a very, 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 very long time. I started drawing when I was a child, before I can remember. I grew up reading comic books, and I've always loved like the visual medium. My mom would read me comics and draw comic books with me and stuff, and so I was very curious about visual storytelling. And when I got into middle school, I joined the school band and had a love for music, and eventually started producing when I got into high school, music producing and creating little films with friends and stuff. We would shoot like Jackass style videos, skating and whatnot, and then that quickly turned into us trying to like script things and make movies, like short films and stuff. And since then, I haven't stopped doing that. That was kind of the beginning of it all, because my whole professional career, aside from doing construction, has been that. Like I don't consider really, I don't do anything else. It's like that. Yeah. So
it's your calling, and
I hope that answers the question.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that we all started from doing Jackass videos. Yeah. And skating poorly, or at least in my case. Yeah. So basically, I want to break up this episode into like distinct sections, just to kind of cut out pieces from the hero's journey and apply it to like what we can translate into the creator. And it doesn't matter, like this should translate across all creative endeavors and even technical endeavors, because it's not unique that like we all have challenges and stuff like that pop up out of nowhere, and especially when you're going outside of your comfort zone in order to grow. And sometimes you're forced to grow, in order to, like, if this is part of your career, or if you're creating content or you're creating an app or something new and novel, you're forced to almost do something that hasn't been done before and learn new tools in order to do it.
Yeah.
So the first thing, I guess, is like, so if we're talking about, the call to create, like we feel that calling, deep in our chest, like what was the initial motivation for you to pursue this life's work, like in all your artistic endeavors?
I don't know if I ever really felt like I had the choice. It's always been, like I said, it's always been something that I did, and to me there wasn't any like other option. It was just, I create, so I'm gonna do it. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I've been told once or twice that I should have been a lawyer. Create some arguments. But I think ultimately what makes me want to create the type of things I create now is I find it to be I find what I do now to be the real option, I guess. Whereas like before, when I was coming up and honestly like still sort of trying to phase this out of my work life, we create for money, we create for other people who commission us and hire us. And a lot of times that you said content, and a lot of times that has to that's sort of like the end goal. They're not necessarily looking for a story. They're not necessarily looking for art. They're looking for something that can draw an audience to sell a product over the course of however many days, weeks, or months, or years, and that is sales based. So you're inherently thinking about it in terms of selling something. Whereas what I enjoy doing and what I feel, I guess, more called to do is tell stories. Mm-hmm. So I don't really necessarily have a drive or a desire to sell anything. If that thing is selling ideas, maybe, but I think an idea is only as good as its opposing idea in context, and that to me is just it's done the best in a narrative. You see a protagonist, you see an antagonist, and there's the conflict between the two, and the good idea wins out, to put it simply. So right. I don't know. Again, I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, no, it does, and I mean it begs like the larger question about like defining art versus defining what utility is. Like I've always said that graphic design serves a more utility function, if that's a word, and it's function, sure. but there's no doubt that there's art that goes into it. Like there's a ton of work from graphic designers who would take issue from that, and I've been designing for my whole career, and it's like I guess it's for me, it's like seeing the process in which you achieve the result. So if you can look at the result and say, this is all me, which you could rarely do when it comes to clients. Like if you're doing client-based work, you often have to work within their framework or whatever constraints they have. But, if you can look at something that you did and you're like, oh man, this is 100% my creativity. And that's not saying you didn't have help getting there. You might, especially if you're doing a film or a short film or something, you're going to have a crew. But at the end of the day, they'll have their input. But at the end of the day, the creative decision falls on you, which oftentimes it doesn't for client work. Most of the time, you can guide them towards a narrative structure, and I personally think a narrative structure is more persuasive. But for you can make the same argument. You could replace client with benefactor, or if somebody's commissioning you, they're paying you to paint something, but it's still in the back of your mind. You're still thinking like it has to be good, otherwise I'm not going to get more money, or I'm not going to get the money, or they're not going to be happy with it. Yeah. So you're almost like morphing who you are, where pure expression comes from from nothing. I mean, especially like this podcast, I've wanted to do a podcast for years, and I was always trying to weave it into the work, basically, to attract more clients, all this stuff. And then I kind of just gave up on finding that solution because it never felt like purely me. It felt like a version of me.
Yep.
The work me, but I do enough work.
Yeah.
You know, like I want to like dig into the philosophical concepts of like the struggles that we go through our whole, you know, whether it be a career or whether it be our personal journey. And I think both of those are woven together.
Right.
Because I think once you're a creator, like whether you're an artist or something else, it's always like intrinsically you. So that becomes part of your personal and professional development if you happen to do it for work. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think, you know, like I'm always working hard to get better and better at my craft, mm-hmm. like whatever I'm doing. And it's, I can see a reflection in my personal life as in my professional life. And most of my like big level ups have come from doing my own stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you apply it to client work after that, you know, totally. And they have that, you know, like that saying, like one for the meal, one for the real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that. It's like sometimes, you know, you do the best that what you can do with what you're given.
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing client work, and then when you're doing your own stuff, or if you're creating a new company where it's all on you, you're the big brain, you're the creative vision. You know, I think that's when you really you can really flex your muscles, and it just comes down to vision. It's like who needs to have the final say.
Yeah.
And if the answer is you, then like, you know, that's when you can truly get creative and push the boundaries and do things you're uncomfortable with, which, you know, leads us to the next section, which is the trials and tribulations of growth, you know, because, you know, it's so funny where, you know, every time you have like this, you know, like I call them baby accomplishments, but like it's like okay, all right, this is good. It's not enough to make me feel complacent, but this is all I need to keep going.
Yeah.
Because it feels like the big ones are so fleeting, you can't even appreciate them.
Yeah.
You know, like with like the amount of work that goes into like getting to that big accomplishment. When you're there, you're already there. So it's like it's almost like you've already plateaued, you know, and then you're moving towards the next mountain range. Whereas the baby accomplishments, the ones that like we never notice are happening, you know, like, you know, the ones where you're just like, yes, like the little thing where you figured something out, where in the past you know, you didn't know how to do something. And then you the next time you do something similar to it, you're like, oh, why don't I try this tool and do it in this way? And like, I love like those mastered the fundamentals type feeling moments, because those are the ones where it's like, okay, I actually know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, like, and like, you know, we've been doing this for so long. Like, I know you feel the same, but like, I question myself on a daily basis. I'm like, oh, you're a fraud
all the time.
You know, like you don't know what you're really doing. And then when it comes down to brass tacks, like somebody's got to figure out the answer. I'm like, wait, how come I'm always figuring out the answer?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, because I know what I'm doing. It's just part of the struggle, you know?
Yeah. And I think there is something to be said about the fact that you have, you started, like you got your start on movie sets. They're like,
my almost start. My almost start.
Well, that's where you were initiated. And, and I know that today so many people are getting their initiation through buying a DSLR and shooting, you know, wedding videos and, you know, again, like there, well, not necessarily again, but there's nothing wrong with that. You know, people need wedding videos. People need, you know, that style filmmaking. But I think when you're pushed into a movie set, rather than doing like run and gun wedding videos, your head is in two different places. There's pros and cons to both, and obviously if you're run and gunning, you are thinking about a lot of technical things and creative things all at once because you have to on the spot. But when you're on a movie set, you're learning. I guess the dynamic range of learning is so much bigger. I don't know if that's true. I didn't start on a movie set, so I can't say like I can't speak to it fully, but that's how it seems.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't get my start on the film set, but I did get into working on monster movies like super early in my career, and I found that the pay wasn't great.
Yeah.
It was quite horrible, but again, like there is this huge breadth of knowledge, you know, especially when you meet specialists like cinematographers, wardrobe supervisors, you know, hair and makeup artists, art directors, and production designers. Like there's so many people that's their craft. So if you're working under any of them, you're going to take away so much.
Yeah.
But you know, like, and I think that's always been, I've always been thankful for like the opportunities in my career to do that, where it's just kind of like you're getting thrown into the ocean, and if you can swim, then you come out of it so much stronger. So I see a parallel between that and like the actual the creator's journey as a whole, which I'm kind of like, that's kind of how I'm thinking of this, where, you know, everyone experiences a calling like one way or another. You know, it's mine's different from yours, but you know, how did that calling approach you? Like, did it happen from, was it just like, this is like what you were saying at the beginning, this is just who I am? Or was there an internal motivation where it's like, oh, I want to do this, you know, for my career, I want to do it for my personal, you know, for fun? Like how does that calling present itself? How did it present itself to you?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, making things, creating, telling stories, that was all just like, oh man, there's that flicker in the wall behind me.
I don't see it.
Jeez.
They got a filter for that.
Yeah, like I was saying, the need or the impulse to create and tell stories, art in general is just kind of like there. Like I've never sought after it, nor have I ever tried to fight it. It's just always existed. But I think what comes along with creating like that and having that predisposition already is an interest in people and an interest in things like scenarios and what makes something interesting. Like I think as an artist, you see through an artistic lens. So you see in contrast, you see in, you know, whether it be lines or whether it be story or whether it be philosophy. Like I think all of those things are just a part of being an artist. And so if you lean into that, I guess, the more you create, the more you design, the more you tell stories, I think it just hones. Like it gets stronger and sharpens more. You become more aware of it, I guess. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's so funny too, because like I've always been a little jealous of you, where you've like found the creative calling so early in your life, and it's carried through. So by the time you're an adult, you know, you're like, oh, I could draw, I could do this, I could play the guitar, I could play the mandolin. I'm like, I don't know what a mandolin is. The worst Italian ever. But you know, because for me, like I never really knew when I was a kid. I didn't really know what drove me. You know, it's been like a work of 15 years of starting to gain a skill set, and then refining, getting better, failing, getting up, getting better, and then you look. I'm like rationally speaking, I know I'm not going to be the world's best artist. I know I'm not going to be the world's best motion designer. There's so many incredibly, talented people who have the drive and the natural talent too. But I'm proud of the skills that I have, but I've realized over time that the thing that truly drives me is I like making things and looking back at what I created. So it's like
progress.
And that's why I loved, when I was learning graphic design at the beginning of my career, when I was learning cinematography, photography, even learning to code. Like, there's just so many, you see the potential in everything.
Yeah.
And knowing, this is where it gets dangerous, because it's like when you have a well-rounded skill set, you can make anything. And if you ever get beyond the scope of what you're capable of doing, there's always other people who are specialists who can add value to what you're making. And it's like nobody makes a movie by themselves.
No.
But there was that one person with the vision, and the vision's easy. It's the execution of the vision that's the hardest thing. The vision's sometimes the easiest thing to have for creatives and creators. I'm assuming that I'm using creatives and creators interchangeably, because in my eyes they're the same thing.
Sometimes we as creatives, we want to be proud of what we make, and it's got to be the best thing. It's got to be no one is the best. You said that, or I don't think you said you don't have to be the best in your field or whatever. But I think there's a point in there that's like, no one is the best. Like, I don't think anyone ever is the pinnacle of who they can be, or the pinnacle of the field that they're in, because art is so subjective that, to one person, the best might be the worst, and the worst might be the best, and it goes on from there. And I personally, I think that's why art is so fascinating, and that's why people are so fascinating, is because we're so different. And what we enjoy is so varied, and so someone can't necessarily really malign a creative on the basis of the art being trash or not. And someone's always going to have an audience.
Yeah.
Even if your art is like quote unquote trash, someone's going to love it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that when you're creating things, it's not going to appeal to everybody, because if you do make something that appeals to everybody, it generally requires a lot less creative input. Mm-hmm. Like, if you want to make something vanilla, you can phone it in all day, follow a formula. Mm-hmm. A formula's not creative. Mm-hmm. Like, following a recipe is not creative. Taking a recipe and doing what you putting love into the food. Yeah. Like, that's what separates the great chefs from the terrible cooks, is that anyone can follow a recipe if they read and take their time. Mm-hmm. But it's the craft that goes behind it, beyond it. Yeah. And like, you look at some of these people creating these crazy like chocolate sculptures and stuff with like a skate park or something, and it's so remarkable. And if you read, a 10-page instructions on how to make a chocolate skate park, 99% of the people aren't going to make that chocolate skate park, and the 1% that do, it's going to be so like vastly different from the thing. So I think most of the time when people call art trash or something like that, you're the wrong kind of audience for it. Yeah. So if if somebody's making art for the sake of getting a rise out of people, that might not appeal to certain people, to certain other folks. Yes. But right. So I think there's a big separation.
I think of The Room, The Room with what's his name, Tommy Wiseau or
that's
whatever
like art
his name is.
Imitating life. Yeah. Like, it's like.
It was such a giant steaming pile of dookie that like. It has a massive fan base for it, and for however you want to criticize the movie, and there are a lot of valid criticisms about it. At the end of the day, packs out art house theaters because people just want to go and throw spoons.
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's like Mono's The Hands of Fate, and like just some of those like poorly destined movies. But like, yeah, I mean, and that's like a whole separate conversation about just going, separating craft from art too, because even craft, you know. But like, you know, I mean, segueing into the next section is, you know, once you find your calling and you're pursuing it, like almost from day 2, there's some sort of obstacle in the way. You know, and the obstacle can be people, the obstacle can be, you know, just the universe, like, you know, lobbing things at you, or the obstacle can be your skill set, where you're just not at the point of, you can visualize it in your head, you can visualize whatever you're making in your head, but you cannot get it out. So and that requires you to go outside your comfort zone and try these techniques, which is so, I love how woven craft is with creation too, because like, you know, you always see these sci-fi movies and you know, they're trying, you know, if you're watching this video, I couldn't make this with the technology I have today. You know, I think of that often, like when I'm approaching projects where it's like, okay, I get criticized a lot for starting and stopping projects, but I do it because I'm like, I'm not at the level where I picture this to be, and I can't devote the amount of time right now. I'm going to shelve this for a couple months. I'm going to come back to it because I know where I'm going to be when I'm able to, you know, because like you don't always have the time you can afford to furthering a certain idea or whatever, you know, for monetary reasons or for other reasons, time reasons, which is the biggest challenge for me at least. But I know you don't like Dragon Ball Z, but I wish there was a hyperbolic time chamber where I spend a year. I spend one day and it's equal to a year because I could just get so much done. But yeah, there's my nerd thing for the day. I'll stop at that.
Yeah. So the biggest things for me have always been time and money, and those resources are so hard to come by, especially today. But they've always been there for me when I was younger as well. I just managed to be more thrifty and MacGyver when I was younger. Yeah. I had a lot of patience for that. And I also loved it. Like I guess I still do to some degree. I love finding problems to really finding ways to solve a very complex problem. Especially when it comes to creating something, getting around a roadblock, whether it be money or time. But time, I feel like, is almost worse than money.
Yeah.
Because it's like you can have the money and still, like, the time creeps up on you. It's that thing that, like, no one's ever gonna have enough of. No matter who you are, time's coming for you.
Right.
And so, but I think resources, with that being money, is very tricky because you can know how to do something and do something well, but if you don't have the money behind you to whether it be rent the gear or get the crew or whatever it is that money can solve, you either have to do what you said is shelve it, or you have to find out a thrifty way to fix it. And in today's day and age, with time being so snappy and money being so tight, I think you just end up shelving things because it's like, I don't have time to figure out a solve for this, and I don't have the money to devote to it right now, so what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
you know?
No, I think it's also a distraction too. It's like I've always said that, like, any distraction takes away from the creative process, because, like, you know, there's certain points of the day where I shut off all communication.
Yeah.
You know, to like the outside world, because like once you get into the flow and you're taken out of it, it takes you like 90, or it takes me at least like 60, 90 minutes to get back into the full flow, and then it's super fast.
Yeah.
But like,
Oh, that's the worst.
You know, and that's the thing too. It's like when you got money on your mind, when you have your personal life on your mind, when you have like things you can't control, you know, it distracts you from fully like getting into that zone. Like the flow state is very zen, and it's just ideas and things are coming right out of you. And you're able to just muscle through the work, and like the grunt work doesn't feel like grunt work.
Yep.
At that point, you know, it's like once you get into that state. I mean, and I think, like, especially with the roadblocks too, because the roadblocks serve as a distraction as well. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like roadblocks introduce self-doubt, which is so unproductive, especially when you're pursuing a mission. And it's almost like, you know, I every day I think of the devil and the angel on my shoulder, and they're both saying bad things, and it's like, no, I'm not listening to anybody, because, you know, it's almost like you have to ignore all the voices in your head saying, like, you can't do this, you can't do that, this is a problem, nobody's going to like this, and it's like, you know what, you guys are distracting me, like, I got things to do, and so, like, I just act annoyed inside my head all the time, or it's like, stop bothering me, like, I got things to do, so, you know, especially trying out new things, like there's always that nagging doubt of like, oh, you have all this work that you have to be doing right now. Should you be spending this extra 2 hours auditioning fonts, or should you spend tonight? You should really just wrap up this job so you could bill it. Should you be spending tonight to code this app that you want to make for, you know, whatever? Yeah. And it's like no. Like this is what I need in order to keep growing. The work can get done tomorrow morning. Yeah. Like, you know, you're going to finish it in 2 hours. So it's like, it's not, you know, so it's almost like the self-harm, like the self-mental harm of a creator, like it needs to be tempered a little bit. And I say this from like the most harmful of mental states, with, you know, where it's like, it drives me even more because it just makes me so upset that my mind's like, it can't accept like a win. Yeah. So I've forced myself to slow down and be like, no, here's my baby achievement. And like, that's what I've been doing. Cause every time you hit the big achievements, like I said earlier, it's like, you already knew you were going to get this done. You already knew it was going to be great. So like, why didn't you believe it from the start? You know, cause you've had all these baby achievements. You don't need this, like, this big grandiose win. Yeah. And that's something I want to dive into in future episodes too, is like, there's a popular author for creatives called Blair Enns, and he talks a lot about the addicted to the reveal, and how creatives are all addicted to the big reveal. You know, they want that big pitch meeting. They want to see the big reaction on somebody's face at a premiere. They want to have the big launch of their product. You know, they're addicted to the reveal, and if you already know what you've been doing is right all along, like, it puts less pressure on that one singular event. Yes. You know, to like uphold your definition of a win, because like, yeah, I've been thinking about wins, losses, success. What does success mean? And it's right. Not. It can't be tied to one single event.
You reminded me of a thought that I had. You know, I think, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that, you know, being a creative, you're both blessed and cursed with the compulsion to, or the impulse to create, and that doesn't stop when you stop working or you stop creating. Like, I rarely go 10 to 15 minutes throughout the day not thinking about creating something or making something, or you know, any of the sort. I am constantly inundated with thoughts about it, and I know that's not every creative. I know plenty of creatives that are sort of, they're fine with just like putting their thoughts away. They can turn it off, and you know, for whatever that's worth, that works for them. But there is some, and I think you can relate to it, that it is just there, and we can't get rid of it.
Yeah, once you turn on the faucet, it doesn't really turn off, and you know, it is funny because that presents its own set of challenges, especially when you're in go mode and you're working with other people making something.
Yeah.
And if they're not moving as fast as you, it creates some friction.
Yep.
So like that's another obstacle that comes up often too, is like different creators or creatives work differently.
Yeah.
They have different processes and stuff like that. And like, if I have an idea at 1 a.m, I'm going to force myself to stay up another hour to at least flesh something out, and it's like,
do you find that when, sorry, go ahead.
No, and then you're tired the next morning, so you have to like drink an extra pot of coffee just to get going. So it does like, you kind of kicking the can down the road, like, so everyone's work styles, need to adapt to their environments and stuff. And I mean, so I guess that tying into the next section, which is transformation and rebirth, like, where's the end of the creator's journey? Like, what is the end? Is there an end?
There's a difference between the creator's journey and the hero's journey, because in the hero's journey, the hero comes home and is changed and, the happy ever after. I think for the creator, that, like I said, we can't turn it off. And, when something ends, I know for me, if I finish a project, I'm already working on something else. I had already been working on something else. It's like in my sketchbook, if I am like, let's say I'm working on, like for right now, if I'm working on, ballads or pretty scores or something like that. In my sketchbook, I'm drawing something that's like really edgy and, it has a lot of like, sketchiness to it, a lot of ink splotches and smudges and maybe even like in the horror world. But if I'm working on something like a punk project or even like a dramatic short film or writing a dark story, my sketchbook is more painterly and colorful, and so when I finish that project, I'm immediately going into another direction. And I think it's like every exit you take as a creator, that leads to a highway, which then leads to another exit, which leads to another highway, and there's never really an end in sight. You're just along for the ride and hoping that the surroundings are conducive for someone like you.
yeah. I mean, that's so not satisfying to hear, but it's like, but it's true. It's like we always look for like a single answer of like, how do I know if I've made it? Or how do I know what does the end look like for me? Or am I going to be this angsty the rest of my life? Like a teen. I never evolved out of the teenager phase. But I think I think the one thing you could take from the hero's journey, whether it's a movie or a book, is that they've reached. So yeah, there's happily ever after, but they have reached a higher plane of whatever. And I have to convince myself that there's like at every step, like the journey doesn't end. It's who I am.
Hopefully you don't devolve as a person or a creator.
But no, you do though. You reach like a higher plane of existence as a creator, because like you have all these tools, and like I always said at the beginning of my graphic design career, I applied every single filter known to man and keep tweaking until I got a good result. And where I'm at now, my tool set is so much simpler, and I don't need all that stuff, but it's just there waiting in the toolbox for when I need it. But I don't, it's like I find myself using a lot less filters. I find myself building a lot more things simply from scratch rather than these complex like Rube Goldberg machine type things. And it almost seems like as you begin, your journey, you're heavy-handed, in a lot of things. You don't have that gracefulness.
Well, you're playing
when you first. You're
experimenting.
All experimenting.
Yeah.
And like as you evolve, like your craft does change, and like how you create things changes too. So I think, in terms of like what does the end look like from a creator? Well, I mean, they die. That's what the ultimate end would look like. But like I agree with you in the sense that you're always going to be creating because it's who you are. It's just what you're creating may look different. Because like I always joke about, like, when I retire, I want to create a hot wing and taco stand. I don't even care if that goes together. It's just, if I don't do that, then I'm probably going to do woodworking as like an old guy. Like, it's the same drive. It's just a different environment. But the funny thing is, you still have the tool set. Granted, you can't use Photoshop for tacos, but you have the critical thinking that you've gained through it.
That's
where if you're presented from a problem,
you evolve as how you process the creative solving side of things evolves and grows. Whereas like the challenges that come up are different, and you might address them, as I guess as a layman, but you have the problem solving that you've developed all these years to address the issue, and you could spend a lot less time like tinkering, I guess, unless you're a tinkerer, which then you enjoy it.
Right.
I love tinkering.
Yeah, and that's fine, but like it always baffles people that brands or giant corporations will spend millions and millions for a brand redesign, and the logo itself is it's just whatever. Like, first year college student could do it, but it's not about the logo, it's about everything else. So, I think the thing is like, it takes somebody talented to be at the pinnacle of their career and still use a font that's available to everybody else, but still make it look like something new. And I think that's how craft really ties into the hero's journey, because at the beginning you don't have a craft. Like, you don't understand the fundamentals. You don't know what you're making. You have something in your mind. So like you were blessed with a vision at the beginning, and that vision carries you through your whole journey. But the thing that you need to develop over time is your craft and your voice. So it's like having the voice of knowing what's your style that makes you unique, and we're all still trying to figure it out. Like you have a style that's very distinct for who you are, and then I have my own style, and like everyone's got different styles. So I think it's like as you develop it, like what does the end look like? Ideally, you would become self-actualized to a point where you know with certainty what your voice is and what you are capable of doing at the current time. I don't know if we're all going to be at that level of self-actualization, but for me, it's something to work towards, where it's like I want to understand myself fully, and it's really like a philosophical journey into myself. Because everything in my life influences the things that I do. Yeah, my past and my present, So it's as I'm finding my voice as a creative, I'm really trying to understand myself better. And that little hamster in the wheel in my brain, I'm like, all right, let's give him a shot of Monster or something, keep him going so we can figure this out. But so the next question I have then is like success. Like, I really feel like it's a fluid concept, and most of my career, and even up until now, like on certain days, like, if you'd ask me, do you think yourself, do you think yourself successful? And I'd probably say like, well, I have some good work, but and then you start comparing yourself to other people. But again, like I mentioned it early, is like, I don't think success can be defined as a singular event. I think it's built up on all these mini achievements that are so they're almost imperceptible. You know, you almost have to catch yourself where it's like, oh, I did this. Oh, I just solved this. Oh, I just solved that. Or I made this. Or I was never able to do this before. Now I can do it now. Those are the ones that you tend to ignore because you're so focused on getting the work done. You're so focused on the end goal, you're missing all the little goodies left behind. And I feel like as creatives, we tend to be farsighted. We almost can never appreciate the present for what it is. We're always focused on like the vision, and for me, you know, even in my relationship, because my wife is very much, she sees the world for how it is, and I see the world for what it could be. So I'm always like tripping over my own 2 feet, and she's the one saying, "Paul, watch your step." You know, and it happens like every day. You know, it probably drives her nuts, but you know, I think it's an important thing to understand about like the role of the creative in the world is we're here to focus on innovation. We're here to push the envelope, and we can be annoying, but at the same time, we still need folks who are grounded to help us make our vision a reality, because sometimes we get lost in the vision so much it's never good enough to what we can imagine, and we're just perpetually tweaking or pushing it down the road, and it's never good enough. And sometimes it comes as a detriment because we're so focused on the tweaking that we never focus on the grand goal of like, maybe it's time to move on to the next thing, the next project, the next whatever, where we can expand like the breadth of our work. Like, you know, like if you look at all the famous painters and stuff, I think who was it, Picasso, that it took him however many years just to be able to draw like a baby again.
Really?
I could be making this up.
That's so funny.
But I think there is that ties in perfectly to what I said before. Is like, it's like you start off heavy-handed. You try all the things. Like the first time painter probably doesn't use one color. They're probably slapping 6 colors on that canvas.
Yeah. And
then you do it for a few years, and then you're like, I'm gonna go through a black and white phase. I want to explore the negative space.
Yeah. Well,
and that's when you really. What's that?
Oh, I was just gonna say that was like the abstract expressionists of the 1950s. They like, at the end of the day, they were really trying to redefine what was possible with painting, and some of them used limited palettes to do it. Like someone like Franz Klein, he refused to buy the expensive inks or expensive paints from the art shop. He had to go to the hardware store and pick up a can of paint and just use that. And his manager or his agent or whoever, I don't know, he went out and got him good paints once, and he's like, take that back. What are you doing? Like, why are you trying to mess with my process? But it's funny because like the more options you have, I think sometimes the more you spend deliberating over how something should turn out, and the more you get pushed into a corner and you can't really find your way out, like you get stuck in the weeds, right? And I find that with writing music, sometimes it just takes like an acoustic guitar or a piano and just coming up with a motif, and then all of a sudden you have a full-on orchestral score,
right.
That could be birthed from that. But if you're like, oh, I need to play the cello and have the flute do this, and you get stuck, you get lost. But yeah, I think that's a typical problem for creatives, because we love to explore. We love like finding options and finding new things, and you get a new toy, and what do you want to do? You want to like use it all the time. And
yeah,
and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think if you're trying to be efficient, then you should be more streamlined. But if you're trying to have fun, then hop in the sandbox, throw things around.
There's definitely value in both of those things.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, I mean, so aside from that, you know, the biggest thing is like fulfillment. I can't speak for everyone else, but like, you know, I get fulfillment from finishing a creation.
Yeah.
Whatever I might be making. And, you know, other people who may not be creatives, they can appreciate, or they might be creatives and they still get fulfillment in other ways. But, you know, I think, hence the name of the podcast, you know, I think that drive, I think that drive is what pushes, you know, people like us to continue creating, and not for the sense of like, if I stop creating, I'm going to die, but be more free with their artistic expression in the creative. And I think that's the end goal, is like the end goal. What does the end look like in a creator's journey? It's free artistic expression of whatever you want to make.
Yeah.
And you're not hindered by whatever insecurities you might have, or you're not hindered by money or external factors. You're just making as pure as you can be. You're just making. And I think that's, for me, what the end looks like.
Yeah.
That's like a good goal to work towards.
Success is funny because like money is freeing. Like, let's just be honest. Like, if you have money, it's money buys less anxiety about like how to live in the world, right? And how to have resources. But at the end of the day, I think success, we confuse success with actually succeeding at something. Like, if I succeed at finishing this product, I'm successful. If I've succeeded in honing this craft or getting to a certain place or a certain level of where I want to be, then I've succeeded, you know? And like you were saying, there's like multiple little wins that you can find. And if you've succeeded to the point that you're for all intents and purposes, one of the best in your field, but money hasn't been a part of that, and you haven't earned money, or someone hasn't given you a lump sum of money and said, you've done well, my son. Like, that doesn't mean that you're not successful. That doesn't mean that you haven't succeeded. It just means that you haven't succeeded at getting money for it. Which, you know, is one of the things that we want to do.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to end this episode, because like that is the core takeaway that I need to I remind myself of all the time, and like I think all creators need to remind themselves that it's like, celebrate the little wins. Yeah, and if something done is way more valuable than something not done. Yes, and not started. Yes, you know, and it's like, I've made 100%. Plenty of mistakes in my life where I didn't start something and I had a great idea, and then somebody else made it a couple of years later, and I was like, man, what are you doing? You know? Yeah. But
you could always come back to it.
Right.
Like you said, shelve it. Yeah. And come back to it later.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I think that's the thing, is like, I know a lot of people suffer from this, and I still, to a point, suffer from this, is like, you talk so much about what you want to do, you feel like nobody listens to you anymore. You know, like you tell your family, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and then they see you not finish it, they just stop listening to you. But you're like, no, this is going to get done. It's just got to get done on my timeline. And I used to apologize for my timeline, but at the same token, it's like, you're not making this for them if you're making it for the right reasons. You're making it for yourself. And I think that's the main thing.
Everything has like an incubation period, right? Yeah. And if you speed that up, you're going to get something premature that maybe shouldn't have been, you know, birthed at that point.
Yeah, snapshot in time. And I just keep thinking of that. So... yeah, so I mean, so that pretty much sums up this episode. I know we could go hours talking about all these little subjects, and I'll probably break them out, you know, for the future and have you back on. But yeah, I'll do you want to tell people how they can find you, look at your work and stuff?
I am at.
You might not want to say that.
You could beep that out.
Yeah.
I'm on Instagram. Instagram is really the only thing that I use. So music by Teo or Teo Multimedia. You could also find me on TikTok and my website, teomultimedia.com.
And what's your name on Spotify for your music?
Oh, you know what? Yeah, you could find me Teo and
Teo.
Yeah, you'll have to look for a song because I'm buried under a million Teos. But I am gonna start a composer Spotify where I'm gonna put all my scores and compositions on that. That'll just be my name. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll link your stuff in the show notes too.
Cool.
Because nobody knows how to spell Teo. Why'd you have to pick the hardest name? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, 3 letters. It's terrible.
Yeah. So just wrapping up, I just want to thank everybody for listening. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you're on Spotify, apparently there's this really cool feature where you can leave voice messages, for me.
That's cool.
So if you leave nasty ones, I'll probably listen to them and laugh, but I won't put them on the show. But if you share your story and just share what your thoughts are on the episode, and maybe if anything resonated with you, definitely give it I'll definitely give it a listen and figure out how to start sharing these on the podcast. We're also on Apple Podcasts, and I just started YouTube. So I'll be putting the full episodes on YouTube with the visuals too. And that's, what is that? Driven to Create podcast. That's easy enough. I'll link that in the show notes too. So if you could help spread the word, that'd be awesome. I'm just trying to see if there's, I know there's other people like us. Like I know Matt's just like me, but, I want to see who else is out there. And I want to hear all your struggles. I don't want to hear your victories. I just want to hear your struggles. Make me feel better. But no, I want to hear your victories too. But keep that on the low. The struggles mostly.
Mostly struggles. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining me today, Matt, and thanks everybody.
All right.
Bye. Click.